I'd like to welcome everyone here to this. I'd like to welcome everyone here to this public lecture. I just offered to introduce Moshe here. I've known Moshe for a long time, 15 years. He was chair for much of the early part of my career. Now that I'm chair, I really have a great respect for Moshe as both a scholar and an academic. And I just want to add a personal comment about this. I think one of the wonderful things about being in a university is that we can have an open, informed discussion about controversial topics. And I know that many of the audience here have strong opinions both ways on whether to merge or not with Baylor. And that I think that the role that Moshe is playing is very valuable for the university here, because if we decide not to merge with Baylor, I think having had a thorough discussion of this will be very useful for the university. And if we do decide to merge with Baylor, having a very thorough discussion will actually be very useful for the university here. So I really appreciate the time and energy Moshe has been actually put into this and trying to essentially encourage discussion and thoughtful analysis of all the pros and cons of the merger. So I'd like to welcome Moshe Vardi here.
Thank you. Just a few quick announcements. Please silence your phone and pager. If you need to get out, there is a door in the back. And when it's over and you leave, there is a reception. It's not for us, I'm afraid. This is a somewhat unusual lecture. I don't think I've ever given, at least since I became an academic, a lecture that was not in one way or another about computer science. This is not about computer science. So why am I giving this lecture? Let me just spend a few minutes trying to give some background. As you know, in a few years, we are celebrating the centenary of Rice University. University graduate opened in 1912. And probably the biggest change university has undergone was in 1960 when it became from Rice Institute to Rice University. And now we are considering perhaps a merger, maybe next year, with Baylor College of Medicine, which will be as profound as anything that has happened in the history of Rice. It's going to be, after that, there will be a different institution, very different institution. This is a critical point in our history. But until recently, I think the discussion has been much inside Rice. Very little light, I think, has gone outside of Rice. The light has gone outside of Rice, was very carefully managed by the administration to reflect a particular view about the merger. And in my opinion, and maybe not everybody will agree with me, the discussions inside were muffled. They were not really open and vigorous discussions. Now, about a month ago, there was a change. Rice released a report on the academic aspect of the merger. It went, first of all, to the faculty at Rice, and then it was released and put on the public website. And David Leebron, the president of Rice University, gave an interview about that report to the Chronicle. And I think to me that was a sea change. That means that at least the administration now feels that we can afford to have a public discussion. And I'm availing myself for that openness. Now, let me follow up on what Joe said. Why are we having this discussion here? If you ask academics what is the foremost value of academia, they will say academic freedom. What is academic freedom? It's the freedom that we cherish of inquiry and instruction. And I'll come back later talk about the role of the faculty in that thing. And we cherish our ability to investigate everything. We investigate nature, we invest society, we investigate culture, we direct our gaze to wherever we feel is appropriate. Well, we should be able to direct our gaze at us, at ourselves as an institution, and have an open discussion the way we have open discussion on other controversial topics in the university, and not hide under, well, we signed an NDA, therefore we cannot have an open discussion. Let's have an open discussion. There will be many different opinions, but we need to have some transparency about what's going to happen at Rice. Now, why me in particular? Well, why not? I'm a senior faculty member at Rice University. I think I bring a fair number of different perspectives to this issue. I was industrial research manager before I was an academic. I'm a faculty member. I was department chair. I'm an institute director. I was a member of the president's faculty advisory committee. I'm a member of the faculty merger review committee. I was a member and chair of national advisory boards. And most important, I have tenure. which is privilege that, in my opinion, comes with an obligation. And the obligation is to tell the unvarnished truth and to speak truth to power. Now, this talk is not going to reveal any confidential information. There is a lot of information out there if you just care to go and find it out. And this is my personal perspective. It's not the view of any committee that I'm on. This is my view. So let's see a brief history of Rice. Many people, I know some people have paid close attention to it. Other people let it just go by. Let's review quickly what happened. I started hearing about it in June 2008, not at Rice, but actually at the medical center, people start talking about the merger of Baylor and Rice, even before we heard anything formally at Rice. As far as I know, the official, or at least pre-negotiation, started in August 2008. By September, David Leebron met with department chair at the university, and it became, at least inside the university, a public topic. The first report in the Chronicle was on October 2008, and then in a short time after that, Leebron did interview with the Chronicle and expected the matter to be settled by the end of the academic year. That means last April or May, let's say. But only by March 2009, the first memorandum of understanding was signed, was extended in June, and extended again by the end of September with some notion of finality, but I think I still write final because it's not clear what final means. But anyway, somehow the expectation is that things should be settled by the end of January 2010. Now, when the news of the merger came out, opinions in the city, and at least as far as I know, the way they are reflected by the Chronicle, I don't know what people say in Galleria, but the Chronicle was very excited. November 11, the headline of the editorial was "Promising Pairing. This merger has the potential to create a national powerhouse. Whatever the financial challenges, a pairing with Baylor will certainly provide an academic boost." Less than a week later, the Chronicle is practically hyperventilating. Eyes on the prize. A union with Rice should be a high priority. The pairing of Rice and Baylor is so logical and promising, and once-in-a-lifetime academic opportunity. Of course, Rice and Baylor have been next to each other for 60 years. Nevertheless, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The president was enthusiastic in his interview to the Chronicle. "I think this would be pretty great for Rice. The opportunities that exist in terms of synergy between these two institutions are pretty remarkable." So everybody excited except for the party poopers, the faculty. Now, at the beginning, other people spoke for the faculty. And when other people spoke for the faculty were equally excited, it seemed. The Chronicle, November 11. "Possibilities created, a wave of excitement among alumni and professors. Many of the school faculty members see the possible union as a boost for its prestige and research funding." David Leebron, November 11. "Reaction to the proposed merger has been positive among faculty across the curriculum." But when we started asking the faculty, "What do you really think?" and April was the first time we did a survey, and in April, when the survey was April 26, the survey was released. At that point, 38% considered the merger to be a bad idea, 20% are neutral, which means only a minority think that the merger is a good idea. And less than 6 months later, by September, just by coincidence, September 11, at this point, 57% thinks that the merger is a bad idea, and 14% are neutral, which means that only really less than a third thinks that this is a good idea. So partly I'm speaking here on behalf of myself, but really on behalf of the 60% of the faculty that have grave doubts and grave concerns about the merger. Okay? And if you look at some blogs and some comments on the Chronicle website, somehow this faculty are the spoiled brats, and they just resist any change. So I would like here to, in some sense, to present the view of the faculty and why the faculty has grave concerns about the merger. And my goal here is not to persuade you. This is a matter of deep conviction. People have different opinion. I hope to engage you and make you think about the issues in a way that, in my opinion, has not happened so far. So what is the basic argument for the merger? And I think I'm going to break it into different pieces. And there is one argument which I would call the prestige argument. And this argument by itself, many people say this would make this merger so logical and so promising. What is it? You have two prestigious institutions. You combine them, you get somehow a super prestigious institution. You know, mathematicians worry about whether addition is super additive or not, and what happens when you combine two things. But somehow the idea was we'll get a very large, very prestigious institution. Undoubtedly, Rice will have what people call a larger footprint. It will be more visible nationally and internationally. People talk about ranking somehow perhaps being increased. Nobody dare to make that comment too solidly because ranking depends on many factors. And if you want to increase ranking, there is other way to do it. For example, you can raise the faculty salary, and that would increase the ranking. And maybe many people would think this is a better way for Rice to invest its funds. So I think this was nobody ever dared to stand behind this claim. Undoubtedly, Rice would expand its educational mission, and nobody could argue that medical education is not something that is valued to society. And Rice would gain strength in the biosciences, which are now many people view as the same way that the 20th century was the century of physics. People think that the 21st century will be the century of the biosciences, of life sciences. So these actually are very powerful arguments. And one would think that you put these arguments and this should be good enough. This should be convince many people that the merger is a good idea. But somehow it seemed it wasn't good enough. Again, David Leebron, November 11. Rice is not in the market for a medical school. Why not? I don't know. Not in the market for medical school. Rice needs to continue to see the possibilities to build on the synergies that exist between the institutions. The phrase around here was, we are not looking for a bolt-on merger. This has to be a bona fide union. No synergy, no merger. And you ought to wonder why. If we saw all this argument about prestige and education and bioscience, why is it not enough? Well, you have to follow the money. So you go back to this enthusiastic editorial by the Chronicle, and they say whatever the financial challenges. That suggests to you that there are some serious financial challenges. Otherwise, the Chronicle would not say whatever the financial challenges. And again, David Leebron, November 11. A general prerequisite is that we are sure the medical school would be on stable and secure financial footing. Apparently, it is not. Otherwise, we don't have to be sure. Now I'm switching to a financial part. Now I have to say, I'm not a financial expert. But on the other hand, as you may guess from my bio, I'm not the village idiot either. And I can read financial statement. And if there's somebody here, I'm sure there are people here with more expertise, I would welcome their analysis of the financial picture. So here is, where did I have this? I had a laser pointer and some just seem to have walked away. So here is what you see. This is all public information about Baylor's finances. Here it is. Thank you very much. Okay. So you see, first of all, of course, this is just a snapshot, a snippets from it. Let's look at investment. 2004, it's $1 billion. The stock market is going up. It goes down a little bit, but you can see between 2008 and 2009, it loses about a third of the value of the investment. Now, at the same time, this is the debt side. You start from 100 million in debt, but by the end, by 2009, we are almost 900 million in debt. So let's do net, and this is a very simplified net. No financial expert would agree with me. This is just the investment minus the bonds. And you see that by 2009, we're in the negative. Now, of course, all along, Baylor is losing money. And in fact, the losses apparently go back to earlier in the decade. But just even these 5 years, Baylor is losing over $300 million. Now, if you analyze again the financial statement, outstanding liabilities, and this is everything, account receivable, payable, what have you, we're talking about $500 million. But the unrestricted asset that you can cash out and try to pay the debt are less than $400 million. So Baylor clearly is in a very, very difficult financial situation. And now you can start to understand why the Chronicle says whatever the financial challenges and why people are worried about the financial stability of BCM. So let's look at it at this important institution, Baylor College of Medicine. It's actually a bit older than Rice, started in 1900, merged with Baylor University in 1903, moved to the TMC in 1943, the Becky joined in 1948. This was, as we know now historically, this was really important thing that launched Baylor to the top tier of medical school in the United States, started a graduate school, partnered with Methodist. That's an important milestone, 1954. 1969, separated from Baylor University and had an agreement with the state. And as a result of this agreement, funds start coming. Even though this is a private institution, it received now, I believe, $52 million from the state every year, which is very unusual for a private institution. By the time I arrived at Rice, it's a top-tier medical school. People are talking about a top 10 medical school. I'm not sure exactly. It's hard to find the history of the ranking. But when I came here in 1994, it was described to me as a top 10 medical school. What happens more recently? Well, 2004, this is the Chronicle, BCM and Methodist sever ties after 50 years. The affiliation agreement that started in 1954 was not renewed in 2004. Baylor was quick, and the next year it signed a 50-year affiliation agreement with St. Luke. And the press release, you will find language that's very similar to the language we see nowadays. Talk about joint effort in program development and funding initiatives. But a year later, this 50-year agreement lasted only 1 year. Again, the Chronicle, the Bollywood partnership between BCM and St. Luke has foundered. And a year later, 2006, Baylor decides to build its own hospital. BCM, to build hospital without partner, cites St. Luke's new direction as reason to split. The 2004 divorce is really what a watershed event in the history of Baylor College of Medicine. Texas Monthly, March 2005. For half a century, in sickness and health, the marriage of Baylor Medical School and Methodist Hospital produced first-class medicine for Houston and the world. But money, egos, and backstabbing came between them. And now both institutions and all of us are the poorer for it. The reality is that, of course, egos are always part of the equations. But when you analyze why Baylor and Methodist divorce, it was about control and about money. Who controls the medicine that is practiced in the hospital? Where does the money flow? With some foresight, some BCM faculty members warned of financial implosion. This is in 2004. So as we saw in 2006, Baylor decides to build a hospital. So they're launching a project, a 600-bed, not-for-profit hospital on the McNair campus, focused on personalized medicine. You might have heard even some advertisements on the radio, Baylor and personal medicine. And what is the rationale? Baylor will finally have direct control of its clinical mission. And that was viewed as critical to the future of Baylor College of Medicine. If they wanted to stay, not just as a medical school, but as a top-tier medical school, they felt that without such a control, they cannot continue to be a top-tier medical school. And in fact, they said not only that, but having such a hospital, with the control, with the flow of money, and the money from the clinical side has to subsidize the research side, and they expect to go from a top 10 ranked medical school to a top 5. They had high ambitions indeed. Construction started in early 2007. Even when the project was launched, not everybody was enthusiastic. A Standard & Poor's analyst said, it is not like there is lack of capacity in the Texas Medical Center, and there is a question whether people will want to keep coming to the TMC as care becomes more sophisticated in the suburbs. All you have to do is drive on 10, drive on 59, and you'll see hospitals and clinics popping in the west and the southwest. In March 2009, just when Rice and Baylor signed finally the Memorandum of Understanding, Baylor froze the project. And they said, we're only going to finish the exterior and postpone completion to some undetermined future, if ever. Wikipedia described this project now. This venture is now considered a toxic asset. Now, if you think what it means is the postponement, it puts Baylor in a terrible bind. Because all these bonds that we saw, these are the bonds that are paying for this hospital. How is Baylor going to repay that bond? From the income from the hospital. Without that income, they cannot pay the debt. But they don't have enough money now to complete the project. So they're stuck with a half project, which is not enough to pay the bonds they have taken on for this project. In November 20, Do you remember the hyperventilating editorial on November 17 of the Chronicle? Well, they already knew what was coming. On November 20, Traber is fired. And this is now happening in slow motion. On June 30th of 2009, Baylor had to declare to be what's called in covenant default. There are two types of default on the bonds. One is called non-payment default. That's not the issue yet, but it's a covenant default. Part of the bonds there, you commit to certain financial benchmarks, and if you cannot maintain them, you're in default. And this is a real default. The bondholders can, in principle, go and claim, okay, the bonds are due now. As during September and October of this year, bad news keep coming. This is a new thing. This is true for today. On October 26, 2009, the financial guarantee insurance policy issued by Ambac Assurance Corporation to ensure payments, blah, 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 will be canceled, released, and returned. Okay? So the bonds are losing their insurance, and almost every week this is called material event notice. This is all public information. You just have to know where to look. Of course, the faculty are sitting there, and they're wondering to stay or not to stay. That is the question. From what I hear, much of Baylor clinical side is really not what it used to be before the divorce from Methodist. If that has to be rebuilt, there is very, very serious rebuilding will have to happen, almost from scratch. The science still holds on, even though there is continuing hemorrhaging. People leaving, more people leaving, more people leaving. They have to think about their future. So the bottom line for Baylor is, how can they survive? And of course, the merger with Rice was supposed to, this was the way they're going to survive. Without it, there's no clear scenario what happens to Baylor without the merger. Now, it's clear that we're talking about a financial bailout. How much is it going to cost? Well, that's part of the figures that have not become available. But we saw that Baylor's liability are over $500 million. So we can imagine that the cost of the merger is at least $500 million. Now, there is a hospital. Somehow funding will have to be required somebody will have to decide whether if you're not completing the hospital, you have to write it off. If you're completing it, it costs hundreds of millions of dollars. One can guess that this is somewhere between $500 million and $1 billion. Now, of course, Rice has no capacity to do anything on that scale, and nobody ever said that Rice will do it alone. But Rice said publicly it will make a substantial one-time investment to support the merger, and now you have to decide what you think substantial is. But, of course, everybody thinks that Rice is rich. This is the rich school in Houston. Rice should have no problem to bail out Baylor, right? Well, as a matter of fact, as soon as the MOU was signed last March, Moody, the bond rating company, put Rice on a watch list. So obviously, Moody at least has some concerns. So let's go and look at Rice finances. This is, again, all public information. So this is the investments. Now, the investment is not the endowment. You hear a lot about the endowment. Investment is, this is a line in Rice financial statement, is the endowment plus trust, fund, all kind of other things, funds acting as endowment, et cetera, et cetera. So we see at the beginning of the decade, we're at $3.5 billion. There was the dot-com crash at the beginning. Then we go up, we go up, we go up. And you see here, between 2008 and 2009, we lost $1.2 billion. Okay? Now let's look at the bonds. Remember what we saw with Baylor? As the endowment is going down, the bonds are going up. Well, interesting, the same thing happens here. By 2000, we have $145 million in debt. Now you have to remember, Rice, the initial trust said Rice cannot incur debt. But somewhere in the late 90s, Rice went to court to change the term of the will, so to speak, and got approval of the court. But you see the debt is increasing fairly modestly. I would say 150 here, and by now it's 225. But you could see in the last 3 years, this is estimated. The last financial statement has not yet been released, but it should be released. I believe it's supposed to be released by the end of October, so it should happen any day. And it'll be interesting if the numbers are much different than my estimate. So again, you see that Rice net now is 3.275, about 3.3, which is almost where it was at the beginning of the decade. So we are not back where we were, as some people say, in 2006 or 5. We are really back to the beginning of the decade. Now what happens in the meantime? Our expenses went from 240, they almost doubled in the past decade. And it doubled. I mean, there was new income. Income came from all kinds of different things. We've become better at attracting research funding. Tuition income has increased. But also, you can see that we have, again, almost doubled the return from the investment. But now this is going to shrivel because the investment has gone down so dramatically. Again, you need to look not at this number here, but really at this number here, which is the net investment. Of course, we all know what happened, right? We lived now through, now people call it the Great Recession, which is the greatest financial crisis since the Great Depression, right? We saw here, we started, and this was amazingly, I mean, the bottom of the stock market at about 6,500, the Dow Jones, was essentially when Rice signed the MOU with Baylor. Now, what does it mean? I mean, these numbers are just numbers on financial statements. What really counts is the budget that university gets to operate, to divide to school, to departments, to program. So Rice draws, and all this is true generally, all private universities with endowments, they draw around 5% payout from the endowment. Now, living on endowment can be very volatile because the endowment or investment move up and down. So usually measures are taken to moderate the volatility. One is you don't look at the last number, but you really average it of the last 12 quarters, roughly the last 3 years. And also the board can adjust this. 5% is only an average number, and the board can adjust it up or down depending where we are, again, so the university will not ride the stock market too violently. But the bottom line is you think it's about 5%. If the endowment is down if the investments are down $1.2 billion, this translates roughly to a loss of income of $60 million per year, okay? Which, as you can imagine, is a very significant, you saw Rice budget. $60 million is a huge part of Rice's budget. Now, to take a $60 million cut in 1 year would be utterly devastating for this institution. And so correctly, we are dealing with it 1 year at a time. For this current fiscal year, the cut was $12 million, which is 5% of what we call the base budget. And next year, we don't know yet. And of course, the big question is the last cut was distributed simply uniformly. Now, people should think, should we distribute uniformly? Should we start cutting down programs? Which programs to cut? Painful decisions have to be taken. And we can imagine this is not. I mean, one should expect that we would see the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years of painful budgets. We'll have to live through them. Everybody, in fact, has to, in some sense, to live through a very, very similar situation. But this is the situation where Rice is in. So Rice is not this rich school that can afford to bail or right. Rice, like all public schools right now and all private schools right now, is in a very difficult financial situation. In fact, it's difficult enough that I have to mention the E word. What is the E word? The E word, exigency. So we talked about tenure, and tenure does offer faculty member the presumptions that they can only be fired for a cause, and the cause has to do either something individually, they have some malfeasance or something like that, or financial exigency. So our policy says that university may terminate an appointment with tenure under extraordinary circumstances because of a demonstrably bona fide financial exigency, i.e., an imminent financial crisis which threatens the survival of the university as a whole and cannot be alleviated by any less dramatic means. Now, is this a financial exigency? This is for the board to decide. But a loss of $60 million, the board could, and nobody would say that they have not done their job if they could decide that this is a financial exigency. I hope they don't do it. I don't know of any other university that has done it. But this is not out of the realm of possibilities. Now, of course, partly what you saw was driving this is that Rice is now much more leveraged than it used to be. So when we now have about $750 million of bonds, that means that our investment portfolio is leveraged. We have more money in the investment than we actually have money to invest in it. And our leverage now is about 120%. That means that ups and downs are both magnified. This is very nice when we're going up. It's not very nice when we are going down. So you heard that Rice says that its endowment was down 18%, but its net investment is down 27%. If you go back and you look at where the investment, the net investment was here and here, you see this is a much more significant drop than you see here. It's about 27%. Now, when we are so leveraged, the other thing that it means that we really have the stock market to perform very well. Because when we have a loan, first of all, we have to pay interest rates on the loan, but also we take a distribution from the investment that correspond to that loan. So if we have a loan that pay, let's say, take a random example, 4.75%, and on the same amount that sits in the investment, we take a payout rate of 6.5%, that means that unless the investments grow beyond 11.25, essentially it means we are eating the endowment. So what is the bottom line? The bottom line I just want to say is that when you go back and you look at the Chronicle saying whatever the financial challenges and what the president talks about financial stability, the background for that is great financial stress at Baylor to the point of questions about the solvency of the institution. And stress at Rice, of course, nothing on the scale of what's happening at Baylor, but enough that we can expect to have very difficult the next 5 years. Unless, again, miracles happen, the next 5 years should be very difficult. And of course, partly what's behind this is this $900 million construction boom. This is not all the pictures. I try to fit what I can do in one slide. Let's see, who can recognize what is this? Child care center. Rec center. Graduate apartments. Tudor Fieldhouse. Duncan College. And of course, the crown of the jewel, the Bioscience Research Collaborative. So what is the Bioscience Research Collaborative? Again, let's do a brief history. The idea was started around 2003. By May 2003, a faculty committee has issued a report. It was called the University in Maine. The building sits in University in Maine. So the faculty committee issued a report. Construction started 3.5 years later. It was first called the CRC for the Collaborative Research Center. Then it became known as the BRC, the Bioscience Research Collaborative. I never understood why they changed one letter, but I'm assuming some trademark or something like that. And last July, researchers started moving into the building. Now, when the idea was first mentioned, it was really Gene Levy's idea. It was received with really nothing but enthusiasm on campus. I thought it was just absolutely a brilliant idea. And the report really conveyed that enthusiasm. They mentioned several existing collaborations that would do better if they were housed in that building that sits at the corner, really a strategic place where Rice and the TMC meets. And they talked about many possible collaborations. And here was the killer argument. This is our chance to have lots of collaborations with the medical center without owning a medical school. And everybody just loved that idea. And the faculty, basically, you go back and you read the recommendation, it cannot be more enthusiastic. They told the provost, go forward, convince the board, do this project. In construction launch in December of 2006, and the press release mentioned lots of partners. Howdy partner. Baylor College of Medicine, MD Anderson, Methodist Hospital Research Institute, Texas Children's Hospital, UT Health Science Center, even Monterey Tech was mentioned as a possible partner. David Leebron. This combination of the TMC research institution and Rice has the capacity to be one of the most powerful biomedical research efforts in the world. Now, even then, some people realize there are some problems. People complained that at the time, there was really little discussion after the University in Maine report has been issued. There seemed to be little discussion of what is the intellectual program of the building. Informatics, I'll come back to informatics a bit later, that was considered to be, when you talk to people at TMC and you ask them, what would you like to collaborate with Rice? They always mention informatics. But when you talk to informatics in the BRC, we just ran out of budget, and we still are searching for the budget to do it. And then, officially, the trouble became known in June 2009, where Nature magazine wrote an article called Texas Side Challenge, talks about how the Texas Medical Center is being hit by the souring economy. MD Anderson, which was for a long time considered the cash cow of the medical center, had major budget cuts. BMC, we just saw at that point became clear to them they cannot complete the hospital. And Rice discovered that because of the souring economy and because of surplus, a glut of research space in the Texas Medical Center, we have lots of enthusiastic partners, and they're willing to do everything except sign a damn lease. So by July 2009, we finally have one lessor. We have Texas Children signs a lease. Now, Texas Children right now is joining the hip with Rice, and even them only joined in July 2009. At the beginning, the idea was that Rice will only occupy 20 to 30% of the building. Now it's officially 50%. But the reality right now is that we have a building that costs $300 million. The interest rate, bond series 2007 A and B, average interest rate is 4.75. You do the calculation, it's $50 million a year. Now remember, we just had a budget cut of $12 million. Is it because of the economy, or is it because of the BRC? So what will be the financial impact of the merger at Rice? There's no magic. If the merger costs money, it must be the expense of Rice programs. There's no other economical miracle. You cannot spend money on X and not have that money somehow not be taken in one way or another from your existing programs. But equally important is the issue of financial volatility. We're seeing now, and I have to say, I have been at Rice now for many years, and I have not seen this kind of volatility. The last time I saw it was in the early 90s when I was at IBM, and IBM was going down the drain practically. So why will it be, even into the future, why are we going to see continued volatility? Because Baylor College of Medicine depends on two sources of income that we all know will continue to be volatile. NIH research funding, huge increase in the late 90s, flat earlier in the decade. Suddenly we have stimulus fund, huge deficit. What do you think is going to happen after that? The other part is the clinical business, is the healthcare business. Anybody here can say what they think the healthcare business is going to be in 5 years? I don't think anybody can speak with any confidence what the healthcare business will be. Now you have to remember, BCM's budget is about $1.1 billion. It's about 2.5 times of Rice's size. When they sneeze, we have pneumonia. And then there is the money from the state. This deal that the Bakey managed to somehow negotiate with the state, and it has to reappropriate it every 2 years. And obviously BCM have good lobbyists because they managed to keep it so far, but really there's no way to guarantee. This is a Damocles sword over your head. We're always going to have the risk of $50 million losing the subsidy from the state. Now when we start talking about the merger, many people say, oh, build a Chinese wall, a financial Chinese wall between Baylor and the Rice endowment. But institution cannot build Chinese walls. At the end of the day, if it's a unitary institution, the financial responsibility falls on the institution. You can have all kind of agreement, but when the rubber meets the road, it's one institution, it's one financial statement. Now some people say that I tend to be somewhat pessimistic. After all, the economy seems to be recovering. The stock market surely eventually will get back to 14,000. We don't know when, but eventually it will be there. But my take on it is university is not a hedge fund. The purpose of the endowment is to add stability, not volatility. Rice should not make bets that depend on the behavior of the stock market. That's what hedge funds do. That's what universities should do. In fact, why not? Well, Baylor did. Look what happened to them. If you have some good memory, Enron did the same bet, and see what happened to them. I lived for many years in Silicon Valley, and Andy Grove was the CEO of Intel and then chairman of the board, and he wrote a book, Only the Paranoid Survive. And in the book, he described how each time you had to worry about the next trend that will kill Intel. So being optimistic is good, but you always have to think, okay, what is the worst case scenario? What could happen? What are the contingencies? So all this just to explain to you why the prestige argument is not good enough. So we started with the prestige argument. Many people think this is good enough, but once you look at the financial situation, you say, oh my God, to take such a risk just for prestige, doesn't seem good enough. We need something stronger than prestige. And that's why the synergy had to be brought in. You had to have a more benefit. You have to promise numerous academic benefits to convince Rice that they should undertake such a risky merger. So where is the synergy? So the synergy was, at the beginning, it's one of the things that's supposed to be so clear and so obvious that you don't even need to spell it out. But going back to the beginning of the year, the faculty started saying, okay, make your synergy argument explicit. Tell us exactly what do you see the benefits going to come out from this merger. In March 2009, in a letter to the board, I quoted Carl Sagan, the famous astronomer, who said, big claims require big proofs. Finally, in September 2009, a year after a whole year of negotiation, finally a subcommittee on academic matters issue a final report. I'll call it the SAM report. And this report was released, as I said, about a month ago in September 25. That report was important enough that in the press release, a big part of the press release talked about the SAM report. A joint academic committee explored opportunities for potential synergies and the process that would be needed to capture them. The committee concluded that a merger could, not would, could lead to a wide array of academic benefits. The committee recommended infrastructure to identify and implement this initiative. So finally, we have a document. It's a many pages. It's a written document. It's a detailed argument, and it's a public document. So let's do what we do as scholars. Let's subject that document to peer review. Peer review is the hallmark of academic scholarship. So the first thing, when we look at the paper, one of the first things we do, we look at the provenance of this paper. Where does it come from? Who is making this claim? How credible are the people who make the claim? So, who are the authors? The authors are Jim Coleman, Vice Provost for Research, and Adam Kaspar, BCM Associate Dean of Research. Now, Jim Coleman I work very closely with Jim Coleman, and I have tremendous respect for Jim Coleman. But these are the two people who are commissioned by their institution to negotiate the merger. In fact, the committee was a joint committee. This is not a Rice committee to decide, is this a good idea or not? This was a joint committee. In fact, the charge to the committee was to produce specific recommendations as to how a potential merger should be implemented. The charge was not to consider whether a merger should happen, but how to implement the merger. And in a cosmic coincidence, that committee was launched on April 24, which was one day after the faculty voted to have their own faculty merger review committee. Perhaps just a coincidence. So what is the substance of this report? The conclusion was numerous potential academic benefits, emphasis is in the original, and a long list of possible new collaborations and new collaborative programs. But the people who are what I call the merger skeptics never said there are no potential benefits. Everybody agrees there could be many, many potential benefits. What was missing in the report is a sober analysis of how do you take potential benefits and you turn them into actual benefits. This is what we actually want to see at the end, things that happen on the ground, not potentialities. So let me ask the questions that I think the report should have asked and didn't ask. So obviously we want to see more collaboration between Rice and BCM and Rice in general and the TMC. And I think this is very important. I spend much of my time trying to develop collaboration between Rice and the TMC. In fact, Rice and Baylor are sitting next to each other now for 60 years, and over 60 years, and they have many, many collaborations. Perhaps people think there should be more collaborations. But it wasn't clear why the merger would make more collaborations happen that didn't happen until now. For every imagined collaboration, the first question to ask is, why didn't happen until now? Now, the answer is that most collaboration happen because of intellectual affinity, not because of organizational affinity. So I just started a new collaboration with a research in Taipei, Taiwan. No department chair has signed any agreement. No dean has been involved. No president signed an MOU. But we have intellectual affinity, and therefore we are collaborating. So it wasn't clear why the merger would create more intellectual affinities. Let me take an example. My area, computer science, informatics. So there's a lot of talk how biology is becoming an information science. And as a result, numerous potential collaboration between biomedical and informatic researchers. And I wholeheartedly believe in this, and I spent much of my time trying to fulfill this vision. But one of the things I discovered is there is a culture gap between informatic researchers and medical researchers. And what is the culture gap? Informatic researchers, what they do for the scholarship is discover methods to solve problems. What the biomedical researchers need is people to solve the concrete problems. That's the culture gap. We can argue who is right and who is wrong, and we can try to devise means to bridge that gap. But this is the gap. The real barrier, in my opinion, in my experience of many years of trying to build collaboration, is cultural rather than organizational. Another question should have been asked. What are the current barriers to collaborations? Would the merger lower them? Can they be lowered without a merger? As I said, many people here, we have many organizations at Rice, committed to building collaboration between Rice and the TMC. Nobody ever asked me, what do you need to facilitate collaboration? For example, I would have said, each institution created an IP policy. These policies now, intellectual property policy, these policies now are a barrier to collaboration. Why don't you guys sit together and once and for all come up with an umbrella IP policy rather than renegotiate IP policy on every single collaboration again and again and again? But nobody ever asked me this question. Another question. Can collaboration happen without a merger? In a Thresher interview on October 2nd, Jim Coleman, smaller projects are certainly possible in the present state, but any large-scale initiative would require the coordination of a single administrative entity. Except if you go around the country and you ask people to say, give me the best example of collaboration between medical schools and non-medical institutions. And the two examples people bring up, one is the Broad Institute, a large laboratory in genomic laboratory in Cambridge, Massachusetts, which is joined to Harvard and MIT. And the second best example is a joint Georgia Tech Emory Department of Biomedical Engineering. Two distinct institutions came together because of intellectual affinity and created a joint program. In fact, the Faculty Merger Review Committee said, we believed that many of the benefits could be realized without a merger. Question number 4. We are not the first, we will not, if Rice merges with Baylor, we will not be the first institution to have a large medical school. Let's see how other institutions leverage their medical school for these numerous synergies and academic benefits. What can we learn from their experience? The report falls short on that. The Faculty Advisory Committee made several conferences to colleagues around the country to find out what's happening in your institution. And we call people rather than write to them because we wanted to get the unvarnished truth. And when we call our friends, the answer usually is, well, yeah, we have this beautiful brochure and we have these nice websites. But the reality is that there's not much interaction. So the reality is that generally, and of course there are exceptions, we just saw 2 exceptions, medical schools are academic islands. Why is that? It's about culture. Culture trumps organizations. Another question, big question, how much would it cost? Talk about new programs. How many new positions? How are we going to build these new programs? After all, this was supposed to be, remember, an implementation plan. Surely, if you're going to do a large-scale initiative, you have to somehow make investment in that. How much? If you don't have a cost estimates, it's a wish list. I can dream many things that will happen, but the question is, how much will it cost? The Faculty Merger Review Committee actually tried to make a cost an estimate, and they come up with something that actually I consider rather modest, an investment of $250 million in endowment. So that means that it should spit out roughly 5% every year. But they said to sustain these new initiatives, we need to raise additional $250 million. Now I have to say that this question is the part that puzzles me the most, because I cannot imagine how you can come up with an implementation plan that doesn't address the financial question. How much is it going to cost? Because we don't know how much it's going to cost. Oh, here's 2 examples. I'm sorry. I want to bring 2 examples where it was really required to come up with a cost estimate. Some report The best example of possibilities for sharing infrastructure are in the area of computational hardware and associate faculty to manage and exploit its use. This is something I actually happen to know something about. As it happens, both Rice and BCM right now are short of space to house computational equipment. In fact, we are trying very hard to do site preparation, which is we have the space, but the space is not prepared to house computers. And just 4,000 square feet to do site preparation is going to cost us $6.5 million. And we hope that the NIH will be generous enough to share the $6.5 million with us. But to talk about possible synergy here without saying that this is going to cost tens of millions of dollars leaves the big questions unanswered. Another example from the same report, a section called Perpetuating Collaborative Success. And they mention two ideas, terrific ideas. Provide funded faculty sabbaticals for Rice faculty at BCM and BCM faculty at Rice. Develop a competitive, prestigious, interdisciplinary postdoctoral research program. No cost estimate. Wonderful programs, no cost estimate. Now, if you don't have a cost estimate, you cannot ask the next question, which is what is the opportunity cost? So let's go to the source of all wisdom, Wikipedia. Opportunity cost is the value of the next best alternative foregone as a result of making a decision. Opportunity cost analysis is an important part of a company's decision-making process. What the right alternative to the merger? Is this investment, is this substantial investment, is this Rice best possible investment? In fact, can Rice afford at all to make a substantial investment in a period where it has budget cut that we expect into the foreseeable future? What would be the budgetary impact of the merger on academics at Rice? If you take a piece of the endowment and you give it to someone else, we cannot take 5% of that endowment that used to flow every year. Okay, let's suppose you take $100 million. That means that we lose every year $5 million, roughly speaking, that used to flow into the budget of Rice. Of course, you can finance something by debt, but we already have a high debt load. And as we all know, debt simply shifts the problem into the future. So Rice is cutting budget and will continue to cut budget in the coming years. And therefore, you must ask the question, what is the impact of the merger on Rice academics? Another question, if the merger goes through, we'll have an institution where the medical school is about 3 times bigger in the number of faculty than the non-medical part. This is one of the most lopsided ratio around the country. There are other universities with large medical schools. Rice will be the extreme end of this imbalance. One could look at Johns Hopkins, Washington University, University of Rochester to see, okay, what happens in that institution? How do they deal with this such imbalance? What can we do perhaps to ameliorate this imbalance? What about students? Right now, already 1/3 of Rice students are pre-med. Now, of course, this is great for medicine, but it creates a certain imbalance in the student body of the university. So we want to see this increased. One idea is to say, okay, let's grow the non-medical part of Rice. How much is it going to cost? Nothing is free. I do want to commend the SAM report for one important element. They did recommend an integration coordination office be created. I think that's an excellent recommendation. In fact, it is such a good recommendation, I made it myself. About a few years ago, not only me, but a bunch of people really realized it would be great to have such an office between Rice and not Baylor specifically, but the Texas Medical Center. The idea did not go forward at the end because even then, 5 years ago, when it was the boom time at Rice, there was no funding for it. So it didn't go through. But I think it's an excellent idea. So what are my conclusions? In my opinion, the SAM report was never meant to be an analytical report. I would say this was a report that was supposed to support a particular line of reasoning. I would say its conclusions were decided before it was written. We argued earlier in the year that Rice, in addition to doing financial due diligence and legal due diligence and whatever other due diligence, needs to do an academic due diligence. And I was hoping that that report would be the academic due diligence, but it wasn't. So I must conclude, and I'm sorry if I offend some people, but I must conclude that the synergy argument has been way overhyped. That it doesn't mean that there are not potential benefits for the merger. Of course there are potential benefits. But to realize them will cost a lot of effort and a lot of money. And many of them can be realized without an expensive and risky merger. But this leaves us now in a conundrum. We started with a prestige argument, and we said it's not good enough, it's not strong enough because there are all these financial risks. And the synergy argument, in my opinion, is way overhyped. So why are we doing this? What is the argument? What really is going on? And I can only speculate here. I'm purely speculating, but I think there's another argument that must be on people's mind. I'm speculating, and I call it the bailout argument. According to that argument, Baylor is a key asset to Houston, to the Texas Medical Center, to Houston, to humanity, but in particular also to Rice, because we have many, many existing collaborations with Baylor. Were Baylor to disappear, Rice would be clearly damaged. It's fairly clear if you look at the financial picture that Baylor cannot survive without something happening. Somebody has to step in and help this institution. So the argument is, well, we are rich, we can afford to do it. Maybe we're not as rich as we used to be, but somehow we can afford to do it. And it will be better that we do it than somebody else would do it. For example, if another university, as you all read, University of Houston wants to become a Tier 1 research university, they may want to somehow overtake Baylor, then suddenly we'll have to compete with a much stronger institution in Houston. That argument has never been mentioned, so I said this is pure speculation. But I have to say, if that argument has been mentioned, I would find it more compelling and a more honest argument than the synergy that's been overhyped. Now, is this a good enough argument? Well, this is now a matter of opinions. I actually fully agree that Baylor is a key asset to Rice, to the TMC, and to Houston. I have deep doubts whether Rice can afford to bail out Baylor once you see the finances of Baylor and of Rice. Suppose that Rice doesn't merge with Baylor. Can UH somehow swoop in? I have to say, I have a hard time seeing it. We have seen now a year of negotiation in private. Once the state has to step in and put out $500 million at least, this has to happen in openness. And I don't know that there is now a public climate for supporting such a bailout. It's not clear to me that this will happen. But it could. Now suppose it does. And suppose University of Houston becomes a Tier 1 research university. What happens? Well, Rice will have a much tougher competition. Now it will have to compete in Houston with a Tier 1 research university. But I think the city as a whole will benefit. I think Texas will benefit. I think humanity will benefit. But this ignores, I think, one very important question is, let's suppose we somehow bail Baylor out. Some philanthropist swoops in and pours $500 million to pay Baylor's debt. What happens to Baylor after that? That, I think, is a question that have not been discussed much. Now, you need to understand that Baylor and Rice now, on one hand, perhaps are negotiating, they have a shared interest. But Baylor have one overriding priority, which, if I were Baylor, that would be my priority, which is institutional survival. How do you save the institution? Now, of course, Baylor would like to stay a top 10 medical school. Well, it's not top 10 anymore, but top 20 medical school. Baylor would maybe like to go back to being a top 5 medical school. But right now, if I'm at Baylor and I say, what's more important, to survive or to be a top-tier medical school, the answer is institutional survival. It's a biological imperative. It's not clear that even if Baylor is bailed out, even by Rice, that it can keep its top-tier status. To keep a top-tier status medical school, this is a very, very competitive field. You need a very particular arrangement, the arrangement that Baylor had before the divorce from Methodist, where they had a leadership, they were in a leadership partnership with Methodist. They controlled the medicine. They received a substantial subsidy from Methodist. I think that it is rather unlikely that someone else, Methodist or St. Luke, will agree to just roll back the clock and go back to the arrangement that blew up in 2004 and 5. And if you don't have such an arrangement, it's not clear that Baylor can stay as a top-tier medical school. We may see it continue to decline, top 20, top 30, top 40. I mean, what is the rank of UT Health Science Center after all? It's a good medical school, but it's not a top-tier medical school. Now, the University of Houston might be content with a second-tier medical school. I think for Rice, it will be just a tragedy to go through this risk and expense and end up with a second-tier medical school. I think it will be just a tragedy for Rice. So, in summary, the risk of the merger. The risk of the merger is that we can see Rice itself decline because of budgetary stress and volatility, and we're going to see Baylor continue to decline even after the merger. I want to spend a few minutes, I know we're running a little late, I want to spend a few minutes talking about the role of the faculty here. Because I think it's important for people to understand that the faculty are not just some spoiled brats. In 1948, General Eisenhower became, for about 2 years, before he became NATO commander, the president of Columbia University. When he arrived, he asked to meet with the faculty, and he gathered them in an auditorium and says, I'm very pleased to meet the employees of this university. Isidore Rabi, a famous physicist, stood up and says, General Eisenhower, I'm sorry I have to correct you. The faculty are not employees of the university. The faculty is the university. But this is a very strong statement. You cannot say it about employees of any other institution. But you have to understand, universities are very special institutions. What is the mission of this university? Teaching, learning, research, scholarship. This is the mission. Who does this work? The faculty and the students. Who decide what to teach, what to study, what to investigate? The faculty decide. Nobody can tell me what is the subject within computer science. Who decides the curriculum? The department decides. Nobody can tell us what to teach and what to study. Everyone else, all the administrative structure at Rice, and I'm speaking here also as a part-time administrator, it's just overhead. An overhead to enable the real work, which is teaching, learning, research, and scholarship. No university become famous for its administration. University become famous for their board. They are famous for their faculties. In fact, the same report itself said the success of any endeavors in research and education will require the passion and leadership of key faculty members whose commitment to the activity will be required for success. Now, of course, they don't tell us who are these people that are magically going to step forward, but they acknowledge the faculty are very important. In my opinion, the administration should have sought faculty involvement from the beginning, from the start. Instead, the faculty had to fight to have a formal role in the process. And this is, I mean, we can talk for a long time just about that, but I don't want to do it. But I do want to say that when it comes to executing the merger, which is going to be an enormously complicated deal, the faculty looks at the current very thin administrative structure at Rice, they look at what happened in the BRC, and they do not have confidence the administration can carry out such a complex managerial task. But neither the faculty nor the administration will make the decision here. The deciders are legally the Rice Board of Trustees, because the merger is a corporate decision and will be made by what legally is the embodiment of Rice University. Now, boards are usually anonymous. Very few people can recite. They can tell you who are the deans at Rice, who are the vice presidents, who are the provosts. Most people do not know other than perhaps the chairman of the board. But I think these people are going to make such an important decision that I think it's important to read their name. James Carnover, the chairman of the board, Bucky Allhouse, Kent Anderson, Keith Anderson, Subha Bari, Susan Dilbooth, Alfredo Brenner, Robert Brockman, Nancy Carlson, Robert Clark, Bruce Dunleavy, Lynn Laverty Elsenhans, Douglas Lee Forshey, Susan Maurice Glasscock, David Leebron, Robert Maxfield, Kenneth Oshman, Jeffrey Rose, Lee Rosenthal, Hector Ruiz, Mark Shapiro, who I think is also the chairman of the Baylor board, if I'm not wrong. Not currently. L.E. Simmons, Robert Tudor III, and James Sterling. This board will have to make a fateful decision. For many of these people, it might be the most important decision they ever make in their lives. While the merger has the potential to lift Rice to the next level, whatever it is, it also has the potential to cause irreparable harm to Rice. The cost and the risk, in my opinion, are so high that the burden on proof is on those who advocate the merger. They should explain why the merger has to happen. I have yet to see such a compelling case. That's what I try to describe in this presentation. In my opinion, great universities are built by years of hard work, one department at a time, one program at a time, one faculty member at a time, not by some risky corporate moves. We all have to remember, human beings are fallible. Great plans go awry. We all have to read the business section of the newspaper. We can read about different other foreign policy initiatives. Great plans go awry. Oliver Cromwell, in a letter to the Coventarian, says, I think, incredibly good advice. Consider you may be wrong. Think of the consequences of that. Recently, as you can see, I've learned here much more than just computer science. And I read a Harvard Business Review article called Deals Without Delusion. And he talked about what are the risks of mergers. And I really think, in my opinion, and as I'm not an expert, Rice has gone over the list and made every single possible error here. Confirmation bias means you make your mind early, and then you don't want to be confused by the facts. Overconfidence in your judgment. Underestimating cultural differences. Underestimating resources required for integration. Bidding above the target's true value, and refusing to walk away from a deal. Thank you very much. Since the food outside is not ours, I'm happy to entertain questions and comments and disagreements.
Thank Moshe, because you've made me think. I'm Bob Brito. I got here in 1959 at the Rice Institute. I think I spent half my life in the Rice campus. So I think I'm also 68, so I don't have a lot at risk on one or the other. And for a long time, I was sort of undecided. When I was wearing two hats, I said, well, if I wear my Rice hat, the Rice alumni, I'm probably against the merger, because the institute that will emerge will be very different from the Rice Institute I joined as a freshman in 1959. Then I decided I'd wear two hats. I'd wear my hat of a Rice University member, and a member of the human rights said, well, maybe it may not be the best for us as a faculty, but it may be the best for the common good of Houston and maybe a great advantage. Then you made me start really thinking about it, and I've seen a lot of transitions. I saw the change at Picture Bank in the early 60s. I was here when the master's crisis. I've seen the evolution of Rice. Then I thought about my own research. And I realized, and this is something Marty Wiener and I have talked about a lot, it's not debate that we have busted in agreement that history is important. When you go back to 1900, about a third of GNP was in agriculture, and now it's a third, 8%. Right now in the 20th century, we've been a manufacturing-based economy. A lot of what we consumed was goods manufacturing. But yeah, my guess, and this is based on my own research, is that that's still a very, very small part of our budget, simply because people like you have created and made routinized things that were done by human beings. So we're going to be turning into a service economy. And the service economy is substantially medical. When I hear that it's 60%, I would be surprised at 40%, and to hear that the economy could be 40% medical is not to scare me. It's just that among the things we consume, they're not will be so cheap.
So you're arguing, I mean, yes, please, but let's give a chance to other people to ask questions as well.
That basically, unless there's something wrong in the sense that it's a completely financially stupid idea, it's something I have no information about and neither do the rest of us, that if it's a feasible idea, I had to come to the conclusion that's actually good for Rice to make a transition comparable to the transition we made when constitutional recovery. And, I thank you for making me think, but you really have convinced me that we should do it eventually.
Thank you. At the back, Seth, the back. Please, let's try to keep it to crisp questions. There are lots of people here.
You've made an outstanding analysis and presentation of very salient facts. There are two questions I'd like to ask you. One is your presentation indicated on November 20th, 2008, Baylor axed its chief executive, Peter Traber. Was there any mention publicly as to why the $10 million man was axed? He is still receiving $1 million a year under his Baylor contract that the Baylor Board of Trustees made with him. That's the first question. Why was Peter Traber axed or dismissed? The second question is, do you have any fear that pressure may be brought on you, or you may pay personal consequences for the outstanding role and also the dissident role that you're playing?
So I have no information about Traber, and I wouldn't speculate on why he was axed and why he got whatever deal he got. And no, I have no fear of personal retaliation. This is a university. We cherish open inquiry. It doesn't mean that some people are not nervous about it, but I think the fears are not substantiated. Other questions? Seth, come down here. I want Jim to have a chance to comment.
So I just wanted to say a few things as co-chair of the SAM report. A couple comments that you made. So one is that you sort of failed to mention that there were two subcommittees to the SAM report, both of which composed of faculty members, many of those faculty members on the FMRC. So there was sort of a characterization that was an administration written report. And in fact, most of the quotes that you took out were actually from the subcommittee reports, which were in one case chaired by faculty Jennifer West and Richard Gibbs, and the other case chaired by Paula Sanders and Gill, but containing members of faculty. So just in case there was an impression that somehow SAM was this administrative report that did not include faculty is not true. Okay, so make sure people know that. I think you are correct. SAM did not answer a lot of those questions that you put up there because it wasn't the charge, and you can argue why it wasn't the charge. That's a whole other situation, but it wasn't the charge. And SAM did not address the issue of how much everything would cost for several reasons. One is because we knew we might invest something, but we didn't know what, and we didn't want. So it was early on in our discussions with Baylor. I think the process issues, it's important for people to understand where we were in April when this started. You didn't really talk about the body of the actual SAM committee, which is one Adam and I co-chaired, which was about the Integration Coordination Committee and was about the need to make sure that we actually have a way to get ideas out of the faculty and vet them appropriately. And that was the real idea of SAM. The concern at the time, with all the excitement about Baylor, which you mentioned, that people were running to David, they were running to the chairs at Baylor, they had ideas. I think a lot of us were concerned that ideas were suddenly going to become formal without any kind of process to actually have faculty propose ideas and not. And then to defend sort of the process that we put in, I come from a background in NSF. I was a program officer. When NSF decides to do something, they don't usually come out and say, we need $1 billion. They say, we have this much money. Let's ask the community what they can do for this much money, and we know some really good things will come out of it. And so that's sort of how we approached SAM. We designed a process that would come to the faculty, say, what are the kinds of things you can do, and then have a very clear, rigorous, and transparent review process to decide which ones we would invest in. And if we invested $100, we would get some level. If we invested more, we'd get more. But that's how SAM took the approach, and I think it was a little bit mischaracterized in your talk. So.
Thank you. You please go from the bottom, top.
Moshe, thanks a lot for the presentation. I have two comments. One comment is on the service economy. The amount of energy we use right now, it's massive. We use about 2 kilowatts per person in the world. That's equivalent to 3 horses continuously running. That's equivalent to about 25 slaves continuously working for each one of us 24 hours a day, which means that you would need 50 human beings as slaves to keep up each one of us working. So that's why we have the affluence we have, and if we look into the future, we have energy only for about 25 to 50 years, depending on which estimates you look at. So I don't think that the 21st century is going to be the century of service and economy. It's going to be, again, the century of physics, hopefully, like the previous 4 or 5. The second one is the one...
I think it would be the century of computer science, but that's a different matter.
Newton's invented an area of computing, right? We use Newton method, so, and he was a physicist. So I pay homage to them. But the other thing is on competition. I think it's really depressing as a faculty member to look at the potential of University of Houston being a tier 1 university as something undesirable for us. We take on professors at Stanford, we take on professors at MIT, we take on professors at Cambridge, England, we take on others anywhere they are in the world, and we try to we contend with them, and sometimes we collaborate, and some other times we compete, and we try to push knowledge forward. So if we had another tier 1 university in this city, we probably would also become better, because we would have a better set of colleagues with whom to contend.
The elk run faster because the wolves run faster.
Gail Slaughter, and I am from Baylor College of Medicine. I wanted to come here to hear what some of the concerns were. I was a bit late because of business there. I did not hear any mention of several significant sources of revenue for Baylor College of Medicine that I think this group might need to be aware of. One is that our Board of Trustees has made a pledge to raise $300 million in a very short time, and these are people who can do so and are doing so. So that is one of the things I think you should mention. Also, Texas voted to fund a $3 billion cancer fund. Baylor is expected to be very competitive for that and amass probably at least $30 million a year in research grants. We just received in excess of $30 million for stimulus funding, and there's probably more on the way. So there are a number of sources of funding that are becoming available. We mentioned faculty are leaving. We've always had faculty leave. We cultivate people who start as very young people, right out of their postdocs at Baylor, right out of residencies, and get offered chairmanships around the country, and in fact take some of those. But we're also recruiting an incredible group of young people who are already winning national and international awards for their work. The $400 million Pediatric Neurology Center is at over $335 million in funds that have come in, and that will be opening very soon. And those funds will then begin to be dispersed. So there are quite a few different sources of revenue that, from what I heard and asked someone sitting near me, were not actually mentioned in terms of really looking at the big picture of what the financial stability is. I get notices every day from institutions around the country because I'm on a list hearing about what's happening in medical schools. And quite frankly, Baylor is actually in much better financial position than a number of places are in terms of not having layoffs, in terms of things they're not doing. That's true of both universities and medical schools. So we all do have to ride out what's a difficult period of time right now, but we have some donors that I think are going to help us do that.
Thank you for these comments. I want to say two things. One is, I bear no ill will towards Baylor. Many of my friends work at Baylor. I view what happened to Baylor as a tragedy to Houston, and in fact, in some sense, to humanity. And I very much hope that a solution will be found. However, the claim is that Baylor suddenly, in 2008, realized, my goodness, we have missed on all this collaboration. For 60 years, we didn't see them. Wow. Let's do it now for collaboration's sake. It's just not credible. So I hope that all the good news in Baylor do materialize, and I hope that Baylor is able to pull itself by bootstrap, if necessary, from its difficult financial situation. But my arguments are not on Baylor per se, but on whether Rice should merge with Baylor. It's getting late. Let's do maybe one more question, and then we should continue discussion. Carol? Seth?
I've been here at Rice not quite for half my life, but almost. Not for quite as long as Bob has, but for really all of my adult life. And I love this place, and it's done a lot for me, and it's given me probably some of the most important things I could ever have and will ever have. So as somebody who's both on the faculty and a member of the administration who is working on this question, it's important to me for people to know that while we are actively trying to see if we can create conditions under which this merger would be clearly in Rice's interest, nobody has made up his or her mind. We don't even know what the deal is. We can't sit down and evaluate a deal when we don't know its terms. And I would dispute various, with great respect and affection, Moshe, I would dispute some of the facts that you presented, but the one claim that you make that is simply wrong is that the people in Allen Center who are spending a lot of time thinking about this question have made up their minds, or, for that matter, that the people across the street who are working with us have made up their minds. We don't even know what the terms of that deal would be. And so, for me, that claim is wrong, and again, with all due respect, irresponsible to make in the way that you make it, and unfair to people who really only have
I did not make such a
the
claim.
best interests of this institution at heart.
Except, Carol, I did not make such a claim.
Yes, Moshe, with all due respect, you did.
No, what I say here, the administration, I say that I only can talk about what has been said in public. I said that David Leebron has been enthusiastic from the beginning. I'm quoting public statements. If David had private misgivings, he did not share them with me. Okay? So I'm talking about what has been said in public, and to say that you all have made your mind, I don't know whether you made up your mind or not, and I will not presume to speak on your behalf.
Again, with all due respect and enormous affection, I do think that when you make the claims that you make about Sam or how it functioned, or about David and his enthusiasm, or you present how the administration acts with a kind of skeptical contempt, that it's not in the interest of Rice or of us. And my own view is that people are going to disagree about this. This is where I do agree with you, is that this is a huge decision. But it is a decision that everyone involved takes enormously seriously. And we just need to, with humility on all of our parts, understand the magnitude of it and move as deliberately and slowly as we can with, all the facts in place. And I believe everyone, like you, is trying to do that. That's my only point.
Thank you. I will be happy to be corrected on any facts that I had wrong. I'm wrong often, and I became more correct often because I discover when I'm wrong. So please do correct me. I did not want to really say that we have somehow malevolent administration. That was not my point, and I'm sorry and I apologize if that's what came across. But you have to see how things look from the faculty point of view. Whatever information you have in private, they do not have. I have more information than typical faculty. What typical faculty member hear and see are the public statements. And the fact that perhaps some of these public statements are meant as negotiating stance with some mysterious partners, that could be well be the case. But what most people see they do not know what's in your heart, they do not know what's in your head, they see the actions. And very often actions speak louder than words. So if we want to have an honest conversation on an event that will transform this university, we have to start having a deep discussion on the facts. Let's put more facts. I know that there are some issues of confidentiality, but much of what I put here is not confidential. The fact that Baylor is in technical default, in covenant default, it's not a secret. Okay? The fact that Baylor is losing its bond insurance, it's not a secret. This is public information. It's available. You just have to know which website to go through. It's what's called the deep web. It's there. But the typical faculty member does not get this information. It's not released to this typical faculty information. When we discovered, I think it was July, that Moody put Rice on a watch list, we were told, oh yes, we know about it from about 3 months ago, but we didn't know about it. So with all due respect, you have to think how things look from the faculty who have even less information than I have.
Well, back up 3 slides of all the mistakes played.
This is now 5:30. I think people need to go home. I'll be happy to stay here and have private discussion with people. Thank you very much.
This program is protected by copyright and may not be redistributed in whole or in part without the express written consent of Rice University Digital Media Services.